Hello and welcome to the 20th episode of the Addiction Free Naturally podcast. My name is Graeme Hoppitt and I welcome you today from wherever you are in the world. Today we're going to talk about community and why it is important, the pros and cons, but why ultimately you've got to change your identity, why that is actually the most important thing. So without further ado, let's get started. So community is absolutely vital, and there's lots of upsides to being involved in a community, such as the 12 steps or some Facebook group. Now, the upsides are really the thing I'd say the most important thing about, or the most important upside, is you're not alone. Because I think when you're stuck in addiction, you actually feel, God, I'm the only one that's suffering here. I'm the only one like this. You know, you feel helpless and hopeless. And by being involved in some community, you realize that actually you're not alone, that there's other people struggling like you. And it kind of gives you a feeling of at least being like other people. So that's the main thing. You're not alone. And I think it's important to realize you're not alone. And that's where the community aspect of, say, the 12 steps helps you. The next part is you're going to get support. You know, just being involved in some community, it gives you a feeling of support. You're going to pick up some tips. You're going to get encouragement along the way. So as you fall off any time, there's going to be sort of people encouraging you. So they are what I'd call the upsides. However, I think there are lots of downsides as well. So the downsides for me, when I look back, when I remember very much at the time, it can be demoralizing, because if you are the only one relapsing, or you're one of you appear to be relapsing more than others, as I was, then that can have a demoralizing effect. I mean, equally, going back to the upsides is, when you see people having long terms of sobriety, that can be empowering. But nonetheless, I found it demoralizing when I was the person who keeps relapsing. And particularly when people were almost saying, why do you keep relapsing, Graeme? So they were challenging me and questioning me in a way that made me feel more under pressure. And I found that very demoralizing, and that affected my self-esteem even more. The other thing I would say, the other downside, I feel, is it can be very enabling. What do I mean by that? It's almost like it's okay to relapse. Because if lots of people are relapsing, it's almost like it's natural, it's normal. So it doesn't encourage you not to relapse. So they can be the downside. So you've got to sort of like flip those pros and cons backwards and forwards, realize the pros of being in a community, like you're not alone, there is some support, there's encouragement and tips, etc. But understanding the downsides, if you're one of the ones really relapsing, that can be a burden on you. If you see lots of people succeeding and you're not, that can be a burden. So there's pros and cons. However, for me, the biggest downside of most of these communities, particularly the 12 steps, are the fact that it reinforces your identity as an addict. And I think that is really the worst thing about most of these communities. See, there's a great quote by Maxwell Maltz, and you've heard me say this again, and repetition is key, and that's why I keep repeating this quote. As Maxwell Maltz says, you can never outperform your own self-image. And what he's talking about there is your subconscious identity. And if you've created that subconscious identity of being an addict, and when you go to a 12-step meeting, you're repeating that. So that's why I'm saying community is not enough. You've got to do more than just have community, because you're not learning the scientific techniques to break you free from your addiction. You're not breaking that cycle in a scientifically proven way, which is going to give you the longevity. What you've got to do is you've got to create a new identity as an ex-addict or a non-addict, a non-drinker, a non-gambler, a non-sex addict. I mean, I personally refer to myself now as an ex-addict, but it's like whatever works for you. As long the point being, don't ever refer to yourself as the addict anymore. Whereas if you're going to most of these 12 steps, well, not most, if you're going to a 12-step meeting, the opening line is you say, I am Graeme, I'm a sex addict, I am Graeme, I am a compulsive gambler, I am Graeme, I'm a drug addict, I am Graeme, I'm an alcoholic. So you are reinforcing that identity, whatever your drug of choice is, whether it's shopping, gambling, gaming, sex, porn, whatever 12-step meeting you go to, you are reinforcing your identity as that addict, because that is your opening line. You say, I am Tom, I am a compulsive gambler, or whatever the meeting is you're going to. That is reinforcing your identity. Now, the 12 steps, bless it, it's helped lots of people, although the reported success rate is very low, less than 10%. But it was created back in 1935. It's now 2021. That's 86 years ago. Do you not think that we know more about how to overcome addictions now than we did 86 years ago? And the answer is, of course, yes. But we still, or the majority still, use this very old method. So I'm not saying don't get involved in a community. As I've said, I've given you some of the benefits of being involved in a community. But what you want to do is you want to, even if you're involved in a community, you want to start creating this new subconscious identity, because that is what runs you. That's what runs you, whether you're trying to lose weight, be better in a relationship, or overcome addiction. You are run by your subconscious programs. You're run on that automatic program in your mind, and you have created that over a period of time. So reinforcing your subconscious identity will keep you stuck as an addict. And that's why, remember, in a 12-step meeting, you go there and people say, I'm a recovering addict. And they're saying that 20 years on. So the whole ambit of the 12 steps is you keep coming back. Keep coming back is what they say, isn't it? But why do you need to keep going back? If you've changed your identity, you don't need to go back. Because you will live into this being a non-gambler, a non-drinker, a non-sex addict, a non-shopping addict. Create the identity of being that non-addict, of being a new person. That's where you have to work from. You have to work from your mind. So effectively, we have programmed ourselves unwittingly, unknowingly, but we've hypnotized ourselves, because the more you do your drug of choice, you have created your addiction as your identity. Every time you take your drug of choice, whether it is a substance, drink or alcohol, or a behavior such as sex or gambling or shopping or gaming, you are reinforcing that identity. So instead of moving away from it, you're keeping yourself trapped in that addictive personality. And we have to break that down. So we've created these pathways in our mind, because the more you participate in your drug of choice, the more you're actually reinforcing the habit, reinforcing the addiction, whatever that be, whether it's a substance or a behavior. And remember the quote, neurons that fire together, wire together. It's like that river that can, create a gorge within a mountain. It can wear away the rock. The same analogy is like that pathway in a forest. Because we keep doing something, we're creating this pathway in our mind. That's what we've done with addiction. And now we've got to start, reversing that. So we've effectively hypnotized ourselves without even knowing it, by doing our addictive behavior over and over and over and over again. And it becomes like this habit on steroids. And, we've labeled that an addiction in our society. So addiction is rooted in the brain, and it's caused by the repeated overstimulation of these neural pathways that we started to create for our addiction, whether it's sex or drink or drugs, whatever it might be. And, that causes then a chemical imbalance. And that's why, we need more and more dopamine. So we need that fix. It's like, dopamine is that happy drug, which we all have. Love creates the same thing. So when you're in love with someone, you're feeling really good, you're getting dopamine pushed through your system. But that's what sex addiction does, or drug addiction, or gambling addiction. It's doing exactly the same. But by doing it more and more, it has less effect. So we need to do more and more, and that's strengthening the neural pathways for that addiction. And that's why we need to break free and create a new identity subconsciously. And that's why community can only go so far. It's only going to help you so far. You have to actually change your mind, change your brain set. You have to create this new self-image as a non-addict, as an ex-addict, whichever term sits with you better, but you've got to create this new behavior. And remember, in a previous podcast, I talked about the be, do, have method, which is really a formula for an extraordinary life, because you have to be that person in your mind first, and then you'll take inspired actions to have the outcome you want. So ask yourself the question, who must I be to overcome my addiction? And therefore, what must I do so that I can have that new life where, you know, gambling or gaming or sex addiction or drugs or alcohol don't play a part in my life? But it starts with asking yourself, who must I be? Who you are being every moment of every day in your mind. You have to grow into that person, because only then will you start doing the right actions, because you can never do who you are not. We can only do who we are. So we'll never be able to be that person if we're not that person in our mind first. So we've got to really become that person. That's what it's all about. So therefore, you must focus on your subconscious identity, or self-image as it's often referred. Because your environment, what you want to ultimately achieve, is a direct reflection of your identity. So if you are reinforcing, as the 12 steps is asking you, you're going to a meeting and say, I am a recovering alcoholic, I am a recovering sex addict. You are maintaining that identity. So you're living into that identity. It's like a snowball. That snowball is going downhill, it's creating more and more momentum. Whereas what you've got to do as the addict, and what I've done as that ex-addict now, so I created those seeds that I was an ex-addict, and then I started watering my garden. So you can't be the snowball and the flowers in the garden at the same time. The two are mutually exclusive. And it all comes down to your subconscious identity. And this is why, you know, people set goals. Let's just use a non-addiction example right now. You know, that's why people set goals which are, and fail them, and it's because they're inconsistent with their subconscious identity. You know, weight is a classic one. People are overweight, and, you know, New Year's resolutions are classic. You know, I'm going to lose weight. After day 4, they've given up. Or love, people are not set up for love. Love is unavailable to them, because internally in their subconscious mind, they feel love is not available. And the same for wealth. You know, you can't become wealthy if you don't have that wealth mentality in your mindset. That's why lottery winners can win millions and millions, and then they lose it very quickly, because their subconscious mind is around poverty. So therefore, they go back to poverty. They're unused to having all this wealth. So it all comes back to our subconscious identity, whether we're talking about weight, love, wealth, or addiction. And that's why we don't want to keep reinforcing our addiction in a community. We want to break free and create a new identity. That doesn't mean you can't go to the community. But I personally stopped going to 12-step meetings because I was not going to reinforce my subconscious mind with, I am an addict. That is the last thing I want to tell myself. Remember, the words that you say to yourself and the pictures that you create in your mind are what create your reality. So I started to create a new identity by telling myself much kinder words. So I created that subconscious identity, and I started to move a new one. I started to move towards it. So I dropped saying, you know, I'm an addict, because that would have kept me stuck there. I'd still be there if I was still going to meetings. Brian Tracy effectively said something similar to Maxwell Maltz. He said, the person that we believe ourselves to be will always act in a manner consistent with our self-image. So that's saying exactly the same as Maxwell Mould, just in different words. We will always perform as we see ourselves. And if you see yourself as that drunk, if you see yourself as that alcoholic or that compulsive gambler or that sex addict, that is how you're going to act. That is how you're going to perform. That is your behavior. That is your mentality, whatever words you want to apply. See, failing at quitting addiction comes back to the fact that your brain's neural pathways are now wired as an addict. And that's happened because you've conditioned yourself. It's a learned process. You've literally hypnotized yourself, put my teeth back in, Graeme. You've hypnotized yourself without knowing it because you keep doing it. You keep gambling and gambling. So you've conditioned yourself to become a compulsive gambler. You keep watching porn, so you've conditioned yourself to become that porn addict. The more you do something, the more it's ingrained in your mind because you're creating those neural pathways. And that's why you're failing to quit, because you've created these pathways and you're not creating a new identity. So it comes back to start by creating that new identity and stop reinforcing your old identity as an addict. Going back to what's called the logical levels. Again, this is in a previous podcast. It was created by Gregory Bateson back in around 1950. And it's like a pyramid. You know, what you want, which is called your environment, so that's you want to be a non-addict, an ex-gambler, whatever it might be. Then your behaviors, and then your skills, your beliefs, and at the bottom is your identity. And see, if your identity is as an addict, then your beliefs and values will relate to being an addict, and therefore your skills will relate to that, because you won't have the skills to be a non-addict, and therefore your behaviors reflect the fact you believe you're an addict in your identity, and therefore that's what your environment, your reality, your life creates. So to become a non-addict, an ex-addict, you've got to have that identity at your core that you are a non-addict or an ex-addict. You're a non-drinker, you're a non-drug taker, you're a non-gambler. Because then you have the beliefs to support that identity, and as a consequence, you will develop the skills, the mental skills, and then you act out in the behaviors to create the new environment, which is being that ex-addict, that non-addict, that non-drinker. So the logical levels gives you the clue, the structure to how to start creating your new life. But be, do, have, which we mentioned earlier, that's where this fits in. It's about being that person, the identity. So you start to take inspired actions in relation to your new identity. So you have the outcome you want of being no longer a gamer, a gambler, or a sex addict, whatever it might be for your drug of choice. So why am I a non-addict? I'm a non-addict now because, or I'm an ex-addict, I call myself normally. I'm an ex-addict because I do the behavior. So if we work down from the top now, you know, I'm an ex-addict because I'm literally doing the behaviors each day to keep myself that way. So now I'm capable of doing what I need to get the outcomes I deserve. So I've now got the skills. So one of the skills I've got is a skill where I've learned to master my emotions and master my thoughts. I understand that I'm not my thoughts. I understand that I'm just a thinker of my thoughts. So if I have an urge, which is very, very unusual these days, but if I have an urge, I have the mental capabilities to move my attention. Again, remember we spoke about moving our attention in another podcast. So I can move my attention away from that urge to something completely different. And we all have the ability to move our attention. I mean, if you was outside walking the street and then, you know, someone fired a gun, your attention would move to that gunshot, wouldn't it? So that's proved that you would move your attention. So this is just a skill to move your attention away from your drug of choice. So whatever is triggering you, if you start to understand how your mind works and understand your thoughts are not you, you're not your thoughts, you can start to move your attention to something more beneficial. So then I have the beliefs, so I've got the skills, but below that, I now have the beliefs and the values around being a non-addict. So I personally believe don't believe like once an addict, always an addict. And that's a common myth in, the addiction circles, that, once you're an addict, you're always an addict, or you're an addict for life, or addict is a disease. I don't believe any of that anymore. And you can believe what you want. And I respect and acknowledge your beliefs. And all I would say to you is, make sure your beliefs support you, because your beliefs will keep you trapped, whether it's about weight loss or addiction. So you've got to make sure your beliefs and values support your desire to be a non-addict. And then right at the bottom of the pyramid, I now have an identity as an ex-addict or a non-addict. So for me, it's a thing of the past. It's something I was, but I'm not anymore. So I've got the identity, I'm now a non-addict, and I've got the beliefs supporting that, and I've learned the skills to support that and enable me to move my attention away from any triggers or urges, and I behave in a certain way which is of a non-addict, and therefore I am a non-addict. So that's how it works. It all comes down to your identity. It's a layered effect. So at the subconscious level, I now have the identity of someone that no longer associates with addiction. I have the identity of someone that life is moving in the right direction, is always growing on a daily basis. And obviously I now help others do the same. So my identity is no longer that person stuck in addiction as I was years ago. My identity is now of someone that's helping hundreds and hundreds of people around the world overcome their addiction for good. And also helping other people, not just addicts, but I help obviously other people. So I've got an identity of a transformational coach and a phenomenal hypnotherapist, helping hundreds and hundreds of people around the world. So what is your identity? That's the question you've got to ask yourself, because if you're still in addiction, then your identity is that of an addict. And it's likely that if you are going to 12 steps, you're reinforcing it. So yes, there's benefits of the community, but understand the downsides. So I do not go to meetings anymore. I haven't for years. I did go to one about 3 years ago now, just to see how I progressed. And I refused to say those actual words. So I didn't say I am an addict. I skipped it. So, if you go to meetings, you've got to be careful. You do not want to reinforce that addiction title in your mind. Because remember, you're creating these neural pathways. So I've now created new neural pathways, but remember the old ones are there. So that's why you never test yourself. You won't test yourself with a drink if you're an alcoholic or with drugs, because moderation doesn't work for most people, which we actually discussed in last week's podcast. It's really all or nothing. For the majority of people, they can't drink in moderation or they can't take drugs in moderation if they were once an addict. So it's all or nothing, really. But you can create, remember, that new programming using neuroscience and neuroplasticity, and in particular by using self-directed neuroplasticity, which is where you would literally reprogram your mind with self-hypnosis or with a hypnotherapist giving you a session. And the hypnotherapist could dig deep and pull out the roots of your addiction, because all addictions are caused by some trauma or something in childhood. And it might not even be something massive. It might just be something quite innocent. But the thing is, you can reprogram your mind, and it's easier than you think, because you have sadly programmed yourself to be an addict by repeating that process. So you played a part in that, as I had done. And then I started to reverse it when I realized, it wasn't helping me, it was destroying my life. So you can start reprogramming yourself using science, using neuroplasticity, hypnosis, hypnotherapy. All the sciences are there to help you. It's just about understanding how your mind works and why you're triggered, and how your reptilian brain, which is the oldest part of your brain, is trying to keep you safe. Ultimately, it's trying to keep you safe. It wants you to have what is familiar. And your addiction is now familiar with you. So that's why it's trying to help you hold on to it tightly. It's like a white knuckle ride. It's not letting you let go, but you have to. and you create new neural pathways in your brain for your new identity. So neuroplasticity has literally shown us that our brains are not fixed. You know, they're actually like plastic. They can be changed, they can be molded, and that's really good news, isn't it? So we can change. So despite, you know, the evidence out there about, like, if you watch too much porn, your mind gets fried. If you're a gambler, your mind gets fried. But if you done a scan, the same effect in your mind happens when you're deeply in love. There's you know, the impact is the same with positive things. It's just like we're just being stimulated. We're looking for things to make us happy. But what we've got to do is we've got to look for those things that make us happy long term rather than that short term fix. So the positive news out of all of this is you can reprogram your mind using self-directed neuroplasticity, which is you can actually do yourself once you're trained. You can train yourself to do hypnosis on yourself. I train people to do hypnosis on themselves. So just a reminder, science, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, these are all things that can help you. And it's about the repeated actions. You're going to reinforce strength by you know, strengthen those habits by literally by repetition. That's how you got here, by repetition. So in summary, community, we spoke about the upsides and the downsides. The upsides are definitely, it makes you feel you're not alone. And that certainly in the early days is a blessing. You want to know that you're not alone, and that like definitely helps you. But the downsides, I think, outweigh the upsides. Once you've got through a little bit, the downsides of reinforcing your identity as an addict, I stopped going as soon as I realized what I was doing to myself. So understand the upsides and the downsides. But the answer is, whether you go to 12-step meetings or not, the answer will always be to create a new self-image as a non-addict. So you can support whatever you're doing in any sort of method of recovering from addiction, but it is supported by creating that new subconscious identity, that new self-image of yourself as a non-gamer, a non-gambler, a non-drinker, a non-compulsive gambler, whatever your drug of choice is. You have to create the image of yourself without that issue. And when you live into that, when you start moving into that, that is when your life changes and it becomes magical. There is no turning back. It's the only way. So I hope today's session has helped. I know it has if you take it on board. So use community positively, but don't reinforce your identity within the community. Instead, create a new self-image, a new subconscious identity that is really going to empower you to overcome your addiction. So you are being that non-drinker, that non-gambler in your mind. And as you start to become that person, your addiction will resolve. So I wish you all the very best. So in many ways, I've given you some examples of the science in recovery. If I can help in any way, because I do help people on one-to-ones, reach out. You can get me at graemehoppitt.com, or you can message me in LinkedIn or my Facebook page. I'm here to help. This is my life's work. This is what I'm here to do. So no one struggles in the way that I did, because it destroyed my life for so many years. But now I love my life, and you can love your life too.